Hello, welcome to today's lecture where we'll be discussing compatibilism. So to get us started, I'll briefly go over indeterminism again, so we're on the same page. Here are three principles that we've discussed so far that seem to reflect some of the common sense intuitions we have about free will, namely sometimes people act freely, every event is caused by a prior event, and free will and determinism appear to be incompatible. Now, indeterminism, it's a thesis, if you recall, that at least one human action is not caused by a prior event. Determinism is, of course, in conflict with indeterminism, so if you reject one, you accept the other. Today we'll be discussing some of what we might call soft versions of determinism. You see, we have already discussed an extreme version of determinism where there's no moral responsibility, every event has a cause. We want to make room for our blaming practices and praising practices because insofar as they seem connected with free will, and less extreme versions of determinism, such as soft determinism, make inroads towards providing space to make sense of those practices, even if we accept that every event has a prior cause. Soft determinists accept determinism, but nevertheless claim that we sometimes do act freely. And advocates of this theory agree every act you perform is caused by a prior act, but you act freely when your action is caused in the right way. So spelling out what in the right way is crucial. Now look, if I grab your hand and make you hit someone, you've not acted freely. So we understand what it is to not act freely. But on the other hand, if you want to slap someone and choose to, then you act freely. So these are sort of like rough and ready examples, right? We know what it means to not act freely. We know what it means to act freely. We just have to spell out what acting freely when your action is caused in the right way means. So here is the first soft determinist theory we'll discuss. It's called typical soft determinism. It's kind of the typical one. Every event is caused by a prior event. This is just determinism. B, a person performs an act freely if and only if that act is caused by a standard volition. Some acts are caused by such things. Sometimes people act freely, and a person is morally responsible for an act if and only if they perform that act freely. So really the only new thing here is this talk of standard volitions. So recall, an event is a volition if and only if it's an act of choosing or deciding or willing to do something. What we'll call a standard volition is a volition that is caused by the beliefs and desires of a relevant agent participating in that event. So this altogether then, B says a person performs an act freely if and only if that act is caused by an event that is a volition, i.e. choosing, deciding, willing. That event itself is caused by the beliefs and desires of the relevant agent participating in the event. So according to typical soft determinism, when an agent acts freely, her beliefs and desires cause a volition, which cause an act. It seems then to be the case that the agent couldn't have done anything else, it was caused, but nevertheless, the agent acts freely. In other words, typical soft determinism accepts determinism and denies indeterminism. So that is roughly the picture. This theory attempts to make space in light of determinism for how we might nevertheless act freely. Now, as you probably expect at this point in the course, there are some problems with it. This is just the first shot, first theory we discuss usually isn't the one we stick with. So consider this counterexample of hypnosis. Eve is a college student, volunteers Habitat for Humanity, food pantries, and organizes events for the Red Cross. Eve is a good person. One evening, Eve is at a party with a friend, Francis, talking and having a good time. However, unbeknown to Eve, an evil hypnotist planted post-hypnotic suggestions. He told her that as soon as she sees Francis, she'll believe he has a grenade and intends to kill many people. Now this works. When Eve sees Francis, she believes he has a grenade and then decides to tackle and punch him. Eve is then arrested. Eve decided to attack Francis, caused by her beliefs and desires, if you know. However, you might not think that Eve is morally responsible for attacking Francis. I mean, clearly she was hypnotized. But if TSD is true, then Eve is morally responsible for attacking Francis. Eve's attack was caused by those beliefs and desires and was caused by a standard volition, so it was free. And if it's free, then Eve is morally responsible for her action. Now, I think you probably will agree, right? Eve is not morally responsible for attacking Francis if she was hypnotized. Hence, it seems like we have a counterexample to TSD. Is this a devastating objection? I don't know. Let's think about it for a second. You might say Eve didn't really believe Francis had a grenade. So you might reject line 1, right? Because for line 1 to be enforced, TSD has to be true and apply in this scenario. So to say that Eve didn't really believe Francis had a grenade would be to reject that she had standard volition in this case. Rebuttal. However, if you run the same argument but replace Eve with for instance, kleptomaniac who can't refrain from stealing, or someone addicted to a substance who can't refrain from partaking in it, it becomes less clear that that individual will be morally responsible for what they are doing. They seem to have the relevant beliefs and desires, um, and nevertheless they seem compelled, we might say, but compelled in a way that somehow does not make them morally responsible in some cases for their actions. That does seem to be an objection that has traction here against TSD. But that leads us to another theory. Maybe we can dig in a little more on what it is to be compelled, or what it is to have a standard volition and act freely in a way that avoids these sort of counterexamples. So let's consider this. We'll call it Ayerian soft determinism. It's a view advocated by A.J. Ayer, which you can read about this week. And the real novelty is in B and C. For B, person S performs an act A freely if and only if A is caused by a standard volition, nothing new there. If S had a volition not to perform that action, then S wouldn't have, and no one compelled S to have a volition to do it. Now, C just says some people perform acts that satisfy these three conditions, and so some people perform free acts. Now, to really get a handle on B, let's just think through those putative counterexamples that we discussed for the previous theory. So, it looks like kleptomaniacs or individuals addicted to substance some substance might appear to fail either BI or BII. So it might not be plausible to attribute a standard volition in this case to an individual who just cannot refrain from stealing, or even if you did attribute, or even if it was plausible to attribute a standard volition to them, if they had a volition not to perform A, they might have nonetheless, in which case BII would not have been satisfied. On the other hand, if we think about the hypnotist example, Eve would clearly fail BIII. So it looks like this more nuanced version of soft determinism might get around some of the counterexamples that we had. There's still a challenge. So, look, my beliefs and desires are caused by volitions, okay, but these volitions are caused as well. Advocates of Ayerian soft determinism must say these events cause my volitions, and I have not been compelled to have them. But what does it mean to be compelled? Now, they've given us something of an analysis, but it's really not enough if you think about it. What's the difference between being caused to do something and being compelled? Suppose I plant electrodes in your brain, and when I flip them on, you have a strong desire to give me $50. Compare this with me convincing you through philosophical argument to give me $50. And then contrast these with me holding a firearm to your head and threatening to kill you if you don't give me $50. What do you think about whether there is compulsion in these cases or compelling in these cases? This is my thought. The first seems clearly compulsion. It compelled you. There's nothing you could do about it. The second, less so strong. If I win on a philosophical argument and you give me $50, it's not like I've compelled you. You have used your reasoning to get where you are, and you've decided that it is in your best interest, or at least rationally, you should give me the $50. But that's actually not too dissimilar from this last option, right? If I hold a firearm to your head and threaten to kill you, aren't you making a rational decision to give me the $50? Am I really compelling you then? What does it mean to compel someone? Where do you draw the line? These boundary cases are fuzzy, but and maybe they're fuzzy for every theory of soft determinism, or maybe just any theory of human behavior. In any event, since the Aryan soft determinist position trades and depends so much on this difference between causation and compulsion, it's a challenge that they need to address. I will say one thing they can't do. What they can't say, so a natural understanding of compulsion is just a case in which an agent is deprived of free will. If we replace compelled here in BIII with deprived of free will, then observe that B becomes circular. Person S performs an act freely if and only if, and one of the conditions is no one deprived them of free will. Well, that doesn't add much to our analysis. Let me summarize here. So soft determinists accept DET and reject IDT. Naive versions of soft determinism, such as typical versions, must avoid counterexamples in which volitions are compelled. Ayerian versions attempt to avoid such counterexamples, but it's unclear what advocates in these theories mean by compelled, so it's unclear to the extent to which they've actually addressed the problem.